All right, this is part two of our series on the World Wars. This one is called American Power Tips the Balance. And this first section is called America Mobilizes. And again, as always, we've got our key question right here, which is what we will hopefully be able to answer after reading the passage. So the key question is, how did the U.S. prepare for war? Let's go ahead and read this together, and we'll start right here. The United States first needed to build up its armed forces. When war was declared, only about 200,000 men were in service. To solve this problem, Congress passed the Selective Service Act. It required men to register with the government so that some of them could be selected for military service. This process, called the draft, put about 3 million men in uniform. Many African Americans served in the military. They were placed in separate units, but some blacks were trained as officers. Blacks were among the first to receive the French honor of this right here, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but basically what that is it's a medal that's given out to French soldiers, and they would have done so much for France that they would have been given that honor. Women were not drafted. The Army would not let them join, but the Navy accepted women in non-combat positions. Women served as nurses, secretaries, and telephone operators. The U.S. built ships to transport men and supplies to Europe. Shipyard workers were exempted from the draft, and the importance of their work was publicized. Prefabrication techniques were used to speed the production of ships. So now the question that we need to answer: how did the United States build up its armed forces? Well, there's a couple of things here. First off, the first one is the draft. Okay, the draft, officially known as the Selective Service Act, which gave the government the right to draft young men into the military, and they were able to build up the military up to 3 million men, and originally they had only had 200,000. So the first one is the draft. That is one way they built up the armed forces, by adding more people. The second one, if we go down here to the last paragraph, you will see how they were building ships. Okay, the U.S. built ships. The reason they were doing that is to transport men and supplies to Europe. If you worked at a shipyard, so if you worked at a place that built ships, you were not going to be drafted. Your job was too important. They needed you to build ships to be able to transport the men and supplies to Europe. So, building ships. Those are the main two things as far as how did the United States build up its armed forces. Number one, they had a draft, which added a lot of young men to the military. And then number two, they had to start building things. And the first thing that they built was ships so that they could transport men and supplies to Europe. All right, this next section is titled America Turns the Tide. So the key question here that hopefully we will answer in the reading: how did the United States help? Okay, how did the United States help the Allies in World War I? Let's go ahead and start reading right here. To reduce the loss of ships to German submarine attacks, the United States and Britain began to use the convoy system. In this system, merchant ships traveled in a large group guarded by naval vessels. American soldiers helped turn the tide of battle in Europe. The Allies had absorbed many casualties and were running out of men. Thousands of fresh American soldiers were eager for battle. So, the question we need to answer down here at the bottom: how did the United States help the Allies? Well, there's a couple things here. They had to stop losing ships. Okay, had to reduce the loss of ships that were being taken down by German submarines. So German submarines were attacking ships that were bringing supplies to Great Britain, and so they had to stop the Germans from shooting down these ships. So what they decided to do is they came up with this thing down here called the convoy system. All right, so here's the idea. You've got these merchant ships over here. merchant ships, that means that they have supplies on them. These are supplies that Great Britain needs. And so instead of sending these two boats out there all by themselves, you would send out these others in front. So you'd have a destroyer, you would have a cruiser, and these ships would be able to attack or take out any enemy submarines or anything else that would threaten the safety of these merchant ships. So the convoy system was something that the British and the Americans came up with so that they could stop their ships from being sunk by the Germans. In the second paragraph, it talks about one other thing. It says American soldiers helped turn the tide of battle in the war. There were a lot of casualties. Both sides were running out of men, so the fact that America could bring thousands of fresh American soldiers over is really what's going to help the Allies win. So, two things here. Convoy system and fresh new soldiers. So we're talking about how did the United States help the Allies win World War I. There were a lot of things, but in our reading here, there are two things that we want to focus on: the convoy system and fresh new soldiers. All right, this next section is titled Fighting Over There. Key question. Hopefully we will answer in our reading down here. What new weapons were used in World War I? The American Expeditionary Force, which was also known as the AEF, was led by a man named John J. Pershing. And this right here is General Pershing. American infantrymen called doughboys. They were called this because of the white belts they wore and cleaned with pipe clay or dough. New weapons played a decisive role in the war. The two most innovative weapons were the tank and the airplane. Air warfare developed rapidly during the war. Pilots went from shooting at each other with pistols to using mounted machine guns. Eddie Rickenbacker was an American ace pilot, and he fought 34 air battles and shot down 26 enemy planes. All right, so the question we need to answer down here, name two new weapons used in the war. Well, there's a lot. There really is a big long list of new weapons that were used. But as far as the two most innovative weapons, that would be the tank and the airplane. So those are the two we're going to put down. Tank and airplane. Another one that's really important, it's mentioned here, it's not really focused on a lot, is machine guns, which was probably the most important. But as far as the most innovative, that would be the tank and the airplane. All right, this next section is titled, The War Introduces New Hazards. Key question, what made World War I hard for soldiers? And that's the key question that we should be able to answer after reading this paragraph. Start reading right here. New weapons and tactics made World War I very destructive. Soldiers faced miserable conditions, including filth, trench foot, trench mouth, shell shock from constant bombardment, vermin, poison gas, and disease. So our question down here that we need to answer, what hardships did soldiers face in World War I? Well, there was a lot, okay. Miserable conditions kind of sums it up. But specifically, it lists a lot of things here. First off, filth. I mean, they're living in trenches, as you can see up here. This is a trench. It's not exactly the cleanest place to be living, and because of the water, as you can see down here, that's going to cause trench foot, which is where your feet get wet and you can't get them dry, and this creates a lot of problems for your foot. Also, trench mouth. Trench foot and mouth, we just put those together. Shell shock, that's where you basically just have a nervous breakdown from all of the constant bombs and firing going on around you. That if you do survive, it kind of drives you crazy. Vermin, just another fancy word for rats. Poison gas, and the last one, disease. All right, so there's, I guess, 6 things here that you could list. First off, you've got filth, trench foot and mouth, shell shock, rats, poison gas, and disease. All right, this is the last section of lesson number 2, American Power Tips the Balance. This section is titled American Troops Go on the Offensive. Key question that the reading should answer here: how did American troops help end the war? We'll start reading right here. American soldiers arrived in Europe just in time to stop a German advance on Paris. One soldier from Tennessee, Alvin York, became a war hero for his actions in battle. At the start, York had been a conscientious objector, and that is someone who opposes war based on moral grounds. So in other words, they didn't want to go to war because of their religious beliefs, because where they went to church, things in the Bible such as thou shalt not kill, things like that, influenced them, and they didn't want to fight because of their religious beliefs. He agreed to fight eventually, and for his actions in battle, he was promoted to sergeant and became a celebrity when he returned to the United States. Germany, exhausted from the war, finally agreed to an armistice on November 11, 1918. The war took a bloody toll, killing more than 22 million and causing untold suffering. So the question down here: how did American troops help end the war? Well, it mentions Alvin York. He is from Tennessee. He became a war hero. As we had mentioned in a previous section, there were a lot of casualties on both sides. So when the United States finally got into the war in the last couple of years, there were a lot of fresh soldiers that were able to come to the line, and one of those would have been Alvin York here. He agreed to fight after having to be talked into it, and because these American soldiers showed up, it caused Germany to basically give up. And so on November 11, 1918, the war is going to end. And the word armistice, that just means a ceasefire. They're going to stop shooting at each other, and they're just going to declare peace. More than 22 million died. So how did American troops end the war? They stopped the German advance on Paris. Now, had the Germans been able to break through, get to Paris, take over France, they might have won the war, but because the Americans showed up, they were able to stop the German advance on Paris. So, how did the American troops help in the war? They stopped the German advance on Paris. All right. Stopped the German advance on Paris.